Hi, I am Mita Naya, and today is Thursday, and the date is 7th October, and I will tell about storybooks today. Means my favorite storybooks. I like to read lots of storybooks. I also have lots of storybooks in my home. When I get any leisure time, I read storybooks and not just book. I also read different stories through phone, and it's really very good habit to everyone. Means for everyone. um, and most of the people also like to read these story books, and they also like it. Means they, when they get any leisure time, then they read all storybooks. And when I used to go to the school, means when I was in school, then when I read in school, then I went to the library 2 days in a week, 2 days or 3 days in a week, and then I got lots of storybooks from library. And this story was really very interesting, well story. Sometime I did not get my favorite storybooks. Then when I did not get any of my favorite storybooks, then I exchanged my book with my friend's book. And my friend, I also had some friend who liked to read these storybooks. And sometime we shared our book. When I took storybooks from library, then I have to submit the book in proper time. So that's why when I get any interesting book, then I gave it to my friends also. Or when my friends got any interesting book, then they give it to me. We read it stories all time. Means when we got any off time, especially when I read it in class 11, then I got lots of classes. Sometime I got lots of off classes, so then I read it storybooks. I also had there also there was a library in my school. And I took lots of storybooks like horror storybooks, suspicious detective storybooks. And I also had a friend, I had a friend, and she liked to read stories, and we listened every stories. And she did it very well. Means most of the time we went to the library and read these story books when we got any off time, especially during after tiffin, after break, after tiffin period. We liked to read this book. Means this time, means after tiffin we did not have any energy, for getting one more class. So then we felt very tired. And so when we feel very tired, then we read it. When we got an off class, then we read it these books, and we enjoyed it also. We also gossip, and we also read it these story books. And but if I sometime we had to take permission to the teachers for taking the book. And if I take book, then I have to submit the book in proper time. um, but our teachers allowed us for taking book. Or otherwise, if I want, then I can take book of subject, textbook of any subject. I can take it. Sometimes we also read it our textbook when we had any study, when we had pressure of study. Sometimes we did project work, etc. But still we read it the story books. And especially we could gossip in the roof. We could not gossip in the library. When we went to the roof with the story books, with one or two story books, then we gossiped and read it book. And when we went to the library, then we had to read. if when we went to the library, then we had to stay silent. If we talked or if we did any quarrel, then our teachers scolded us. We scolded by our teachers. So that's why, especially when we went to the library class, then we read the storybooks most. And I got some story books during my birthday. My one friend gave me a story book during my birthday. This storybook I have this storybook now. So and I read these storybooks also. And this storybook was horror storybooks. Means they had lots of horror stories. And I like to read horror stories most than everything, and I also like to read the detective stories. Detective stories are also very most interesting than everything. And but when I read it in a horror story books, then sometime I got afraid. But still I like to read. And this my friend gave me these horror story books, and I read it these story books for means every time I read it the storybooks, means every story I read it all stories in this storybook. Of this storybook I read it all stories of this storybook. And I also like to buy lots of storybooks of different storybooks. When I go to any fair, then I like to buy storybooks. And when I go to the fair, then I buy storybooks also. Means I like to do it. Means once I went to the fair with my friends and my father, and then I brought two horror story books, and my father gave it to me. And every time I read all stories of the storybooks. But after a long time, I could not read the stories. I had pressure of studies, so that's why I did not get any time for reading all stories. But for in this pandemic situation, I read all stories. Means I completed all stories of the storybook. During this pandemic situation, when every time I got lots of time, and I stayed in the home, I could not go outside. So sometime I read stories of this storybook during at noon. I read this story. Sometime when I fall asleep, then I could not read, but most of the time I read these stories. And I also got one more story books during my birthday. My sister-in-law gave it to me. And these storybooks was really very there has lots of interesting stories in this storybook. It's not. And there is lots of horror stories. Sorry, horror not. Interesting stories in these storybooks. Not very interesting. Suspicious. Trailer means the story. Every story was really detective based stories, and every stories was not so big stories, small short stories, but very interesting. And I liked to read these storybooks. Means every day. I got habituated. Means I got habituated to read the stories. I got addicted to read all stories. And every day I read stories, and I completed to read all stories. um, and there has no stories. There is no stories which I did not read. And some stories was very big, and some stories has some episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. There has 3 or 4 stories. These stories is big, some big stories, but very interesting detective stories. And 2 or 3 stories was small. And I have 3 horror storybooks, and I have one storybooks which is not horror storybooks, which is not detective stories books. Means the storybook is really very good storybooks. And some people also have some library of book. different storybooks. And I also like to go to the library and taking lots of well books of well story books. And when I used to go to this, means when I read it in school, then I selected books, means I everybody, means anybody could not take two book, means everybody had to take one book or one story books. So sometime our teachers gave it to me, gave it to us, we could not select. And there had some rule. One day you can select your book by yourself, and one day your teacher will give you a story book, you have to take this story book. So sometime when I could not select storybooks by myself, when my teachers gave it to me, then this day I selected one storybooks which I want to take next time. Or suppose any friend, which book I selected, this book, if any friend took this book, then I exchanged my book with her sometime. But sometime she did not want to give me, sometime I read it. When my teachers gave me some story books, then there has not, means sometime I got well books from my teachers, but sometime I did not get. When I did not get any interesting stories, then I did not read any stories of this book. So read one or two stories, but I did not get any interest. And our library was so big, and there had lots of storybooks, they were so tough, means you cannot take storybooks story you, if you want, then you can take any textbook of any subject. But if you cannot take any storybooks, because there was some students who did not want to submit, who did not submit the books in proper time. So that's why our teachers did not give us give did not give allow did not give permission for taking books unnecessarily. We had to take books in proper time. So that's why, or if I want to take book, then I had to read this book to sit in the library class. I could not go outside. So that's why I did not take storybooks so much from the library. But when I read it in class 11, then I read it in another school, shifted in another school. They had not so much restriction. I can take book, and I can read. But I have to give return. But there are not so restriction. And otherwise I also like to read some magazines. I also had some magazines which I got from school, Anandamala. I got it from school. I had lots of magazine, minimum 10 or 9 magazine. I have this magazine now. And I read it some stories. They had some stories in this magazine, and the stories was beautiful. But the stories was the story was fictional, means I don't like to read fictional stories. So if you give this book to a child, to a kid, then they will get some interest. But I did not get any interest. Fictional stories is I don't like to read fictional stories. I like to read reality some stories to relate with reality, or reality based stories, thriller, then detective stories, horror stories I like to read. And I also downloaded some app in my phone for listening stories or for reading stories. But I installed lots of app, and I read it some stories from this app, like ebook, FM radio, etc. I downloaded for 1 day or 2 day. But after that I uninstalled it, because ebook, if I install ebook, then I have to then there was lots of well stories, but every stories was not complete. If I want to read some interesting, some well knowledgeable stories, then I have to buy. Or there are some rules, I could not read without anything means, but the story was good. And I like to listen, uh, when I got any big stories, then I liked to read, um, sorry, I liked to listen big stories. I did not get lots of patience for reading these long stories. If you give me stories, long stories, step by step, episode by episode, one episode, two episode, then I get interest. But if you give long stories to me for reading, then I lost my patience. I lost my patience. So this big story I like to read, in episode, or in step by step, or I like to listen this big stories. Otherwise I like to read small stories, short stories. And I also install FM radio. FM radio is also well, and I listen some stories, and in this FM radio, uh, I was listening everything in Hindi. I did not get anything in English. I means I did not get any English stories, or I did not get Bengali well stories. Everything was in Hindi. Hindi is well, but I wanted to listen some English stories, or I wanted to read some English stories, but I did not get. So I I listened some Hindi stories, horror stories, and after that I uninstall it. And I also installed one more app, story. I redid this app. I don't remember that what was the app, uh, and there had some stories, well stories, but the stories was also fiction stories, means they had some fiction stories. So I did not read any stories more. And and I also like to read some stories of textbook. I have some textbook of Bengali, English, and I also like to read these types of stories. These stories was good also. I liked it. And once I went to the outside with my parents, then there had book fair, and I went to the book fair, but I did not buy any book, because we went for in another work, but we did not know that there also had a book fair. So I wandered around the book fairs, means there had lots of books of English, Hindi, Bengali, every language, in every language. And but I did not buy any book. And when I go to any fair, book fair, or when I go to any fair of any festival, then I buy one story books if I get. Sometime I did not get any story books in any fair, but when I get, then I buy. Um and 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 otherwise I also like to listen stories. When I used to go to the school, then I had some teachers who told us some stories to us, during study. When we did not get, means our teachers could understand that, which we will like, when we feel bored, to read our story, to read our textbook. And then our teachers tried to encourage us and told some real stories to us, which relate with reality. And our teachers also told some interesting stories, inspiring stories to us. Sometimes our teachers also gossiped with us with their child life, with their school life, etc. They gossiped with us. They told the different types of stories to us, and I also liked to listen it. And or some people also like to read book during travel. When anybody have any travel, long travel, then they like to read storybooks. And I did not bring any storybooks during travel, but I also like it. When I am going anywhere, with any vehicle, then I can feel bored. If I have it storybooks, then I can pass my time properly and I don't feel bored. And this it's also good habit to read storybooks. Some people also read storybooks during sleep. Some people like to read storybooks, and it's also good. Sometime when I did not have any when I did not sleep, means sometime I read storybooks before sleep. And when I had any tension, or when I had when I have any nervousness, or when I get tensed about anything, then I also like to read storybooks. Means in every situation, in every condition, especially during any tough condition, if I read storybooks, then I will get relaxed. I get relief. These storybooks, it's also, I think that it's a habit to read storybooks. Most of the people like to read it, and most of the people don't like to read storybooks. And I also read some books with some stories through phone, and I followed some page from some social media, and they upload some stories, and I liked to read it. And I enjoyed when, especially when I feel very bored, when I feel very bored to read any books, especially when I feel very bored during when I feel very bored during read a textbook, then I read it, these types of stories. And it's really relaxed my mind properly. And I also got interest to read. Means I took some rest from reading this book. Um, and and I also like to give a gift of a book. Means a book is also very, really very good gift for some people. Means those people having depression, mental depression, or mental sickness, they can read storybooks. They will get a relief. During lockdown, when I did not get any way for spending time, or when I feel very bored to stay at home, then I started to read storybooks, and I really got lots of interest, got relaxation uh, to read these storybooks. And every time I wanted to read stories. Means during this lockdown, I completed all stories of storybooks to read.